Good evening. The White House thought it had a tiny scandal on its hands, a storm in a teapot over the granting of credentials to a writer from an unknown news organization operated by a Texas Republican politician, a pseudo-reporter who asked questions of the president and press secretary so softball in nature that they embarrassed even arch conservatives. Turns out that was the good news. Our fifth story in the countdown tonight, the writer known as Jeff Gannon has resigned his position with Talon News after a series of accusations, foremost of them that might not be his real name. And the trade publication editor and publisher writing that a series of internet blogs, quote, posted allegations yesterday that websites such as hotmilitarystud.com, militaryescorts.com, and militaryescortsm4m.com were registered to the same owner as Gannon's home website, jeffgannon.com, according to the blog Media Citizen. That blog reports that the acronym M4M is common internet shorthand for Men for Men. Gannon, or as investigators at the website Daily Kos have identified him, James J.D. Guckert, had been at the center of a small controversy largely limited to journalistic and intensely political circles for several weeks. Congresswoman Louise Slaughter of New York today wrote to the president asking, in essence, if Gannon or Guckert was a plant given White House press room credentials in order to provide Mr. Bush with what some more established reporters analogized to lifelines from the TV series Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The scrutiny intensified after the president called on him at Mr. Bush's January 26th televised news conference, and Gannon, or Guckert, asked a question during which he stated that Democratic Senate leaders were, quote, divorced from reality. And he misquoted Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid as having forecast an economy so bad it would produce soup kitchens. The remark was actually made in jest by the conservative commentator Rush Limbaugh. Gannon, or Guckert, posted a brief note on his personal website explaining the end of his reportorial career, quoting it, "Because of the attention being paid to me, I find it is no longer possible to effectively be a reporter for Talon News. In consideration of the welfare of me and my family, I have decided to return to private life. Thank you to all those who supported me." Reached by Countdown via email for further comment, Gannon wrote only, "I have nothing to add to my statement posted on my website." The bona fides of Talon News have also been questioned. Bobby Eberle has identified himself as its editor-in-chief. He is a Texas Republican activist and party delegate who also runs the political organization GOP USA. The website of Talon News offers a one-sentence mission statement of sorts. Talon News is a news company which covers political, national, and world news. Talon News focuses on those stories often overlooked by other media outlets. Evidently, it is also recruiting. Want to join the Talon News team? Click here to find out more about being a volunteer reporter for Talon News. Further, editor and publisher also today states that Gannon's name turned up on a list of reporters whom federal prosecutors wanted to question in the leaking of the identity of the CIA covert operative Valerie Plame, the wife of former Ambassador Joe Wilson. During an interview with Wilson, Gannon had referred to being in possession of a secret memo identifying Plame. In a moment, the journalistic implications, even the security implications of the presence of Gannon Guckert inside the White House. First, you heard his questions described as softballs and sounding like plants. Better that we let you judge for yourself with videotape of some of the actual questions at the actual White House news conferences from Jeff Gannon, formerly of Talon News, and maybe formerly Jeff Gannon.
Go ahead, Jeff.
In your denunciations of the Abu Ghraib photos, you've used words like sickening, disgusting, and reprehensible. Will you have any adjectives left to adequately describe the pictures from Saddam's rape rooms and torture chambers? And will Americans ever see those images?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff, because... Go ahead, Jeff.
Doesn't Joe Wilson owe the president and America an apology for his deception and his own intelligence failure?
Go ahead, Jeff. You have one.
Thanks. Why hasn't the administration made more of the UN inspector's report that says Saddam Hussein was dismantling his missile and WMD sites before and during the war?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'd like to comment on the angry mob that surrounded Karl Rove's house on Sunday.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. With all the reaching out that's going on around here, the president said Thursday in his press conference that he was reaching out to the press corps. What did he mean by that, and why would he feel the need to reach out to a group of supposedly nonpartisan people? The Welfare Reform Act comes up this year for renewal. Is the president supporting efforts to insert meaningful work requirements into the bill where today there is none?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Since there have been so many questions about what the president was doing over 30 years ago, what is it that he did after his honorable discharge from the National Guard? Did he make speeches alongside Jane Fonda denouncing Americans' racist war in Vietnam? Did he testify before Congress that American troops committed war crimes in Vietnam? And did he throw somebody else's medals at the White House to protest a war America was still fighting? What was he doing after his honorable discharge?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Senate Democratic leaders have painted a very bleak picture of the U.S. economy. Harry Reid was talking about soup lines, and Hillary Clinton was talking about the economy being on the verge of collapse. Yet, in the same breath, they say that Social Security is rock solid and there's no crisis there. Well, how are you going to work with people who seem to have divorced themselves from reality?
Ali G from HBO without the satire. There is the seamy side to all this, too. The Media Citizen blog referring to the other purported internet homes of Gannon and or Guckert as having prompted, quote, allegations of involvement with several websites appearing to support gay pornography and promote male prostitution. It's the scandal that just keeps on giving. To help us recalibrate the focus back to the White House itself, I'm joined now by Dana Milbank of the Washington Post, until very lately that paper's White House correspondent, and thus until very lately a guy in the same room as, if not exactly a colleague of, Jeff Gannon. Dana, good evening.
Good evening, Keith, but I prefer if you'd address me by my new pseudonym, Dirk Diggler.
That's very nice. We'll get to the journalism here in a moment, but ultimately, is it not relevant here? Is the most relevant thing not the fact that somebody in the government decided that a guy apparently using an alias who may have also run a website called hotmilitarystud.com would be allowed into the White House every day?
Well, that would seem to be the most amazing thing. And in fact, as of Monday, I saw whatever his name is waiting outside there at the White House. In fact, he would probably be allowed to continue doing this as of now if there weren't some website called, of all things, World O'Crap that had gotten into all these person allegations. It was Jeff's decision, or whatever his name's decision, to step down. He wasn't kicked out of the White House at all. So that's really where the scandal lies in this whole thing.
It's been reported that he was issued daily passes rather than the proverbial hard pass, the permanent one that admitted him. Is that correct to your knowledge?
Well, we don't know. I've seen him with something that looked an awful lot like a permanent White House pass with his face, name, and organization on it. Others have seen the same thing. We don't know for sure, but either way, it's clear that Scott McClellan knew that it wasn't his real name. He had to provide his real name to get into the White House, so here you have the press secretary to the United States playing along, addressing this guy by his pseudonym. So there was some degree of complicity, even if he wasn't granted, against White House rules, an actual hard pass.
About the journalism, you can argue forever about who should be in the White House press room. There's politics involved. There's seniority. You could make the case that Helen Thomas's justification for being there has declined steadily over the years, largely because her news organization, which is my alma mater, UPI, gradually vanished underneath her. But what besides those questions made this case of Gannon or Guckert so egregious?
Well, I mean, there were a couple of different instances here, and in fact, Helen Thomas was passed over and has lost some of her stature during press conferences because of her decline. They said they were passing over her because she's a columnist. Jeff Gannon, whatever his name is,
was G. We'll just call him Mr.
Let's just
G.
call him Mr. G. He did get to ask a question of the president, whether that was deliberate or not. You know, what it really comes down to here is that it's not the type of question he was asking. I find that funny. It was a brief break. It was an amusement. The fact is he was representing a phony media company that doesn't really have any such thing as circulation or readership. It's affiliated with something called GOP USA. So there are many people, Fox News, Washington Times, they're conservative, but they're legitimate media organizations. So this guy is not a real journalist, and he was hanging out there wasting everybody's time in the press room.
And it was pointed out that many of the articles turned out to be just long transcripts, essentially, of these news conferences anyway, rather than actually any opinion whatsoever. It was just basically a transcript service. But let me ask you finally, is it fair to contextualize this in light of the well-publicized administration payments to Armstrong Williams and two other columnists to support their policies? Is this a mutation of that, or is it just lousy judgment? In other words, was he a plant, or was he just an ineligible presence?
Well, I think he's probably somewhere in between. You saw from the clips you play there of Scott McClellan turning to him as a lifeline. I call him a foil. You turn to this guy when you want to get the heat off of you from another subject. It follows a pattern in this administration. We've seen not only the Armstrong-Williams case, but cases in which people, there have actually been actors used posing as journalists in advertisements. This seems an awful lot like that. This didn't have as far-reaching consequences, but it was of a similar vein.
Dana Milbank of the Washington Post, if that is your real name, his credentials both impeccable and legitimate, now a political correspondent, formerly the White House correspondent, beat guy. Great thanks, sir. Who knows what will turn up next on this?
Who knows? Thanks, Keith.
As if, quote,